The French Revolution, Part 1. Starting off the bat, one of the things we need to know is that this is a social revolution, a political revolution, an economic revolution. This revolution wants to entirely remake French society based on Enlightenment principles and Enlightenment values. A lot of people argue our revolution, the American Revolution, things didn't necessarily really change. Massachusetts still very similar to how it was pre-revolution. Whereas in revolutionary France, their political structure, social structure, values are going to drastically change. And we also need to ask the question, why does this revolution happen in one of the wealthiest countries in the world? You think that revolutions would happen in a country that doesn't have a lot of wealth, has a lot of political instability, but it's going to happen in one of the wealthiest empires of the New World and Old World in France. So looking at French social structure, political structure, really gives us a clue why it broke down. We have the old regime, which is in un, deux, trois estates, 3 estates. And what are these 3 estates? Anyone remember? Estate number 1 is what? Yes?
The clergy.
Excellent. It is the clergy. So that term clergy, what does that mean? We don't really use that much, very much anymore. Someone I haven't heard from yet. Excellent. So the religious leaders, whether it be cardinals, bishops, priests, those that pray, those that are in the church. Wonderful. Number 1. There you go. You can see him. Who is part of un, deux? Excellent. So that would be the aristocrats, the nobility, the upper crust. So these are the people that would have lands, farms, estates in the countryside that they would have jurisdiction over peasants, could collect taxes. And were they allowed to live in the countryside? Where did they have to live? Mills?
Versailles.
Versailles. Why?
So the king could keep them all under his control.
Excellent. If you are here, you are not out in the countryside causing rebellions, causing problems. I want centralization of power, so therefore you are here with me in Versailles. Very, very good. And un, deux, trois estate, that's what? Excellent, that's everyone else. In the cities, that would be people like merchants, traders, guildsmen, blacksmiths, coopers, that type of stuff. Whereas in the countryside, it's largely peasant farmers. And what separates these different estates politically? What did the first and second nobility get out of that the third did not get out of? Luna? Taxes, right? So if we think about it, the richest people in France, those that can collect taxes for the church, those that can collect land taxes and other taxes, those are people that do not have to pay taxes themselves, whereas the burden of taxation falls on the common people, which would probably make a lot of people angry very, very quickly. And they also have something called privileges. What are privileges? It's a term thrown around a lot in political circles. What's privilege? Excellent. So you could think of it as private law. Private access to power. Nobles were the only ones that could wear swords. The nobles were the only people that could have red high heels. Yes, men, if you were a nobleman, you could have a sword and you could have red bottom, awesome high heels. Ladies, are there expensive shoes that have they have red on the bottom? They're supposed to be like a status symbol. What are those? Are those Louis Vuittons? Vuitton? Louis Vuitton. There we go. So, that sounds French. Louis Vuitton. There we go. So if you need your red bottom shoes, you can't have them unless you're an aristocrat. Even nowadays, it's a bit of a status symbol. Excellent. So that means, taxes could be collected by the nobility. The church collected something called a tithe, which was a tax on the people in order to support the church. If they were building hospitals, if they were taking care of the sick, they would need money. They served that kind of social function. How come nobles didn't have to pay taxes? How come you would exempt nobles out of anyone else. If we think coming out of the Middle Ages, what was the role of the nobles? What were they supposed to do, particularly in times of crisis? Going back to feudalism, what were nobles supposed to do if you say Vikings showed up or Magyars showed up? Twyla?
Like have armies?
Yeah, they're supposed to train, defend, rise up, have armies, right? They're supposed to be the nobles that had swords, that defended the peasantry, that kept the king's lands and their lands all in line. Yes?
But like at this point, the nobles aren't even on their own land anymore.
Yeah, so they kind of have inherited privileges. Because if we think about trying to train an army, raise men, prepare them, armor them, that's a lot of money. So the king would say, I'm not going to collect taxes from you. That money goes to the preparation for invasion or preparation for defense. So be prepared. By the time of the 1600s, 1700s, you have the establishment of a national professional army. You don't need those nobles as much as you did in the past, but they still have those inherited privileges of not being taxed. Does that make sense? Très bien, mes amis. Is it mes amis?
No, it's mes amis.
Mes amis?
No.
Les mis.
You don't pronounce.
So if we actually compare it to nowadays, this is a little bit older. This is in 2012, but it's pretty comparable to now. Not much has changed, only a little bit with tax brackets. But the tax burden of America today, the top 1% of income earners pay 38% roughly of the federal income tax. So if we think about the federal income tax bringing money into the United States, the top 1%, those people that have a lot of wealth, pay roughly 38%. If we expand that a little bit further to the top 5%, they pay roughly, 58.72% of federal income tax that goes into the federal coffers. That's a lot of wealth, right? We really do, as a society, rely on, the entrepreneurs, the captains of industry, whether it be people from Silicon Valley or industrialists, in order to provide things like roads, schools, education, military. What would happen if we exempted them from taxation? The cost of living would go up, prices would rise, your taxes would increase, you wouldn't have nearly all the social services that you folks have nowadays, and we would have to drastically restructure society. And that's how kind of things were happening in France at the time. Free from all taxes. There was actually one village that I looked at in France. This nobleman liked to have lavish parties, and so he started taxing his villagers in olive oil, spices, and chickens. So he could have spiced chicken parties for his other noble friends, as well as wanting to. He taxed 1 year 880 bottles of olive oil. Could you imagine that? It's like, hey, peasants, you know what I need from you this year? I need 880 bottles of olive oil, some spices, some chicken. By the way, you also have to do some labor, such as break bread, prepare grapes for wine, grind corn. And you can imagine if you're a peasant and you're part of the 80% of the population, how do you feel? Absolutely terrible. These nobles are living off your stolen wealth. That you produce, you labor, you're the one in the fields, you're the one tilling the earth. Well, these nobles are kind of an economic parasite on you. They don't serve a function, they don't really help you, they just make life harder for you. They tell you that you need them, but you don't necessarily believe it. Couple this with the fact that there are often droughts, famines. In the one winter of 1709, it was so cold and so terrible that when you poured wine into King Louis XIV's glass, it would actually freeze in his cup. You know the term, winter is coming. Yeah, there's an awesome scene, I'm not endorsing this, but where there's like, kings froze in their huts, just like villagers out in the field. That happened in 1709. Absolutely crazy. And over 1 million French peasants died that year due to starvation from crop failures and harsh conditions. Same type of thing happened in the 1780s. And another thing that is happening is that life is getting worse for the French peasantry. Even though they're making money, France is an empire that doesn't go into the countryside. That's largely through trade and commerce. What ends up happening is you have the same amount of land for a growing population. So as people grow up and want their own farms and want to make money and provide for their families, you have overcrowding. So you have more people with less land, so that means each farm is what? Becoming smaller. So you still have the same taxes, you still have the same burdens, but now you have to do it with less land, and it becomes an issue. Couple this with the fact that you are paying for the 7 Years' War. You are paying for the American Revolution. Anyone here like big history buffs? Like, I don't know, maybe you love the musical Hamilton, maybe you love the founding period of the United States. I would be blown away, but who saved us, kind of helped preserve our independence from Great Britain? Who was it? Marquis de Lafayette. Who intervened on our behalf and saved our butts?
Oh, the French.
The French, of course, right? If we think about what's called the Battle of the Chesapeake, très bien, merci beaucoup, François, right? The Battle of the Chesapeake, you don't need to know this. This is just a fun side note right now, okay? In this Battle of the Chesapeake, you had the French Navy and the British Navy end up, the French held them off long enough so that George Washington, Marquis de Lafayette, other heroes of the Revolution, could surround Cornwallis in Yorktown, Virginia. Cornwallis thought there were going to be British ships so he could get away. The French stopped that from happening. Cornwallis surrenders, and we win the American Revolution. Thanks to the French Navy. Pretty cool, huh? And then we got to liberate their country later on when they, in World War II, were under Nazi occupation. There's actually a famous case where when American soldiers were getting off the boats to storm France when it was occupied by the Nazis, the famous rallying cry was, "Lafayette, we are here." That you helped us liberate us, and now we have returned to liberate your homeland. Cool. Let's take a look at the French budget. All right, what's 50% of the French budget in the 1780s? It is debt. You know, this is serious debt. This, to an economy, is like telling someone to run uphill with 2 monster truck tires tied to the back of them and just saying, you know what, go for it, make it up the hill. This is a weight on the economy that is truly hard to deal with. Couple that with the fact that what is 6% of all national wealth going to? Versailles, a pleasure palace for the rich and famous. So congratulations, peasants, you're paying for our wars, you're paying for our empire, you're paying for everything, you're paying for our pleasure palace, and we're not paying really anything. Military, as well as public works, make up a significantly lesser part of the national budget. So if we think in England, how did the king raise money? What did he have to call in order to create taxes? Mills? Parliament, a legislature, right? King Louis XIV, with absolutism, didn't have to rely on the nobles, but with this new situation, he had to rely on the nobles. He needed money, he needed wealth, he needed some type of income in order to try and save his kingdom. And with this, he's going to call for an assembly of notables. So he's going to try to bring in the clergy, he's going to try and bring in the nobles and say, hey, can I what? Can I tax you? Will you give me some money? Will you save the French kingdom and be a patriot, please? And in 1787, these nobles start to flex their rights. Maybe we want some political reform. Maybe we want some more privileges. Maybe we need something in order for you to tax us a little bit more. And this turns into a political stalemate. Does that make sense? You can look at this cartoon from the time where you can see that this wolf here is looking at all of these birds, and it says famously, the wolf is the monarchy, and these birds are saying, this wolf is saying to the birds, what sauce would you folks like to be cooked in? So the political equivalent of how much money would you like me to take from you in the form of taxation? So can I tax you, folks? All right, Audrey, can I tax you? No, you can't even get my name right. All right, so this is obviously a fail. So what the king is later going to call for is another advisory body that had not convened since 1614. This was the Estates Générales, in which the three estates were going to meet up, air their political grievances, try to raise funds and save France. And what's going to end up happening is this is going to be really an area that calls for political reform, where the third estate goes from saying, let's work with the king, to let's push for something else. Let's push for a radically different system.